Welcome back to the Chelsweets kitchen. Today I'm making a really fun cake to celebrate my massive life change or career change to switch from my corporate job to doing Chelsweets full-time. So if you want to know more about why I made that decision and how I came to it, I have a really in-depth blog post where I walk through my entire thought process, so if you have some time, I think it's a pretty good read. So to make this cake, I'm using a bunch of different chocolate cake layers, and this is just my go-to chocolate layer cake recipe. So I have one 7-inch, 3 6-inch, and then 3 4-inch cake layers, and we're going to be building these up into a cone shape to look just like a party hat. It's going to be filled with some chocolate buttercream, some chocolate ganache, and decorated with a bunch of different colorful buttercream to make it look just as fun as the party that it's for. So I'm going to go ahead and get started assembling this cake, and then we'll get going on the decorations.
So just like always, I'm starting off with a 10-inch grease-proof cake board, and I spread a bit of buttercream on the base to help secure that cake layer and keep it in place. I'm alternating on this cake chocolate buttercream, chocolate ganache, and a bit of just regular vanilla buttercream. So you could definitely just use one filling for this cake if that's what you have on hand. I happen to have a bunch of leftover chocolate ganache and chocolate buttercream, so I decided just to mix up the fillings. Chocolate's also one of my favorite flavors, and I really love the kind of ombre effect that the different fillings created. So I continued to stack all of my cake layers up from largest to smallest, and when I got to the top of the cake, I actually used a small, I would say 1.5-inch circle cutter to top the cake off to help create that cone shape. So once all my layers were stacked, I was ready to start carving the cake. To make that process easier, I inserted a small wooden dowel into the cake just to keep all my layers in place. I also added a bit more frosting and ganache to areas where I knew I wouldn't really be carving, where I'd have to fill in with frosting anyways. So I smoothed that out and then set to work carving this cake. So I'm using a serrated knife here, and I'm really just taking my time. You can see I'm trying to let the knife do all the hard work, and I'm not applying a ton of pressure. And that's really important because you don't want your cake layers to tear as you're doing this. You really want to get the shape that you're after just by gently moving the knife back and forth. So once I had got the shape that I was after, I chilled the cake and then I added a thin crumb coat. So this locks in any of those loose crumbs and makes it easier to get a super smooth second layer of frosting. To do this, I used both an offset spatula and an acetate sheet. Once the crumb coat was smooth, I popped the cake in the freezer for about 10 minutes to chill, and then I began to crumb up about 1 cup worth of cake. And this is from that cake layer that I cut the circle out of. I'm just using the rest of that cake layer. I mixed this with about 1/3 of a cup of frosting, and I then added it onto a piece of saran wrap that I had laid out. I rolled this into a ball and twisted it, and then popped it in the freezer to help it set. So this is going to be the top ball on top of our party hat, but it has to firm up first. So while I set that aside, I began to work on my second layer of frosting on my cake. So I'm just using my vanilla buttercream here. I'm adding a thick second layer, and I'm smoothing it using my bench scraper. So a bench scraper is a great way to start smoothing, but on a cake like this that is a little bit curved, you really do need an acetate sheet or something flexible to help you get that frosting really smooth. Next, it was time to add the top onto the cake. So I used a skewer to help keep this in place, and I placed the cake ball right on top. I added some frosting around the base to help secure it, and then using a grass tip, I began to pipe some texture around the cake ball. So I really wanted this to look more of like a festive party hat, but it ended up looking a lot more like the pom-pom on top of a winter hat. But this was a party in the winter, so I'm just going to say that it is a winter party hat. Anyways, once that was in place, I started working on the decorations around the cake. So I had all those different colorful buttercreams with a variety of different frosting tips, ranging from a small French tip to even just a piping bag that I had snipped the edge off of. So I tried to add some fun textures here and make some small swirls, and before I knew it, I had filled up the entire cake with color. Even though this cake was for a party later that night, I wanted to cut in so you guys could see the inside of it. Don't worry, I just placed it in the back of the room where you couldn't really see the cut. So my first slice ended up being a bit too small, so I actually decided to cut out a second one, which I was much happier with. You can really see all the ganache, the chocolate buttercream, and that vanilla buttercream. And don't worry about the cake, I added some frosting over the cut section so it stayed nice and moist. I couldn't resist doing a little taste test, even though I was going to eat the cake again later in the day. But you can see that chocolate ganache is so rich and so delicious, and this cake really was a winner. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to click the like button and also let me know what tutorials you'd like to see next. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.